So next we're going to talk about the nutritional use categories that we utilize to classify and name plants, specifically crops, so field crops. So we'll look at oil crops, we'll look at sugar, protein crops, starchy seed crops, and then a little bit more of root and tuber starchy crops. Sugar crops are pretty common around in the United States, really, but it's actually sugar crops are grown in different ways. Traditionally, a lot of people think, oh, it's either sugar beets or sugar cane, but that's not the case in this day and age because we can grow sugar crops in many different ways. One big one is now including corn. So we can grow more intense sugar content in a lot of varieties of corn to mix with different feeds, to mix with different really anything with livestock. So that's really important. And then sweet sorghum, again, looking at those sugar crops in terms of forages and mixing a lot of those feeds together for livestock as well. So obviously, you know what a sugar crop is. It's just a crop that contains a lot of sugar. So again, commonly we see sugar beets and sugar cane. So we know that in today's world there's a lot of influence and conception on high fructose corn syrup. So how we're utilizing high fructose corn syrup. That comes directly from corn, and it's a very, very cheap sweetener that can be used to sweeten a lot of different things. Most common, we see that in drinks, like in Hawaiian punches or different drinks like that, and candies. And then we look at the conversion of cornstarch into from a kernel fructose to a glucose mixture, which then that gets involved with a lot of things with your body and how it's going to convert that energy to a fat, and if it's a good fat or a bad fat. So that's a lot of chemistry that we'll talk about in class and go over kind of the differences of that. But that's kind of what a sugar crop contains and what is. So just know that sugar beets and sugar cane are not the only crops that are grown for its sugar content. We grow sweet sorghum, we grow different varieties of corn to make sure that we're utilizing all of the crops that we can have on a very economically standing United States use because they obviously contain oil, and we use oil for a lot of different things. One big push for oil now has been canola oil, peanut oil, flax oil, and that flax oil, a lot of that sunflower oil. It's a little bit more pricey than just your basic vegetable oil, just because it has a little less fat but more nutrient content. Soybean oil has been pretty popular the last 10 to 15 years just because we're learning how to use soybeans and soybean oil for many different things. Peanut oil is pretty good, and flavor has a lot to do with this too. So if you're going to fry different types of food in different types of oil, it's going to give it a different flavor. One interesting fact that is always neat to look at is soybeans account for half of the edible oil production. So when you think of oils and what you're cooking with and how you utilize oils, whether that's on the livestock side or whether you're eating it, you don't really think about soybeans. You think about vegetable oil, or you think about now canola oil, but soybeans actually account for about half of the edible oil production in the world, which is pretty awesome when you look at how much soybeans we grow. Because it's naturally high in protein. This is really important in the livestock world too, because we utilize these protein crops to give protein to those animals. So soybeans, field beans, peanuts, sunflowers, peas are a big one. Those are actually a companion crop that can be grown with different pasture grasses as well. And it's the most important source of protein for many crops, for many countries in the world. So if soybeans can be grown in developing countries, that's going to be the first thing that they are going to grow, because it's not going to take as much manpower to do that, but it's going to have a huge amount of protein in it, which is what developing countries really need. And if they don't have access to livestock, this is kind of the second best thing for developing countries as well. Starchy seed crops, very important, obviously, because we look at it as it has a it's very high in starch. This also can be grasses or non-grasses. So wheat, millet, rye, buckwheat, sorghum, those are all different kinds of ways of starch, and we use them in all different kinds of ways, but the whole purpose of them is to have that starchy seed. It's going to give us that energy storage as a starch, and it can be converted into energy by humans. Now, that's not saying that I can go out and have, 7 helpings of potatoes and be ready to roll in an hour. That's not the case, because you probably ate too many potatoes, too much starch, but our bodies can digest that and actually turn it, if it's the right amount, turn it into energy, which is what is needed. Okay, medicinal crops. These are crops that are grown specifically because they give us some sort of like pain relief or disease treatment, or different ways of making us feel better. So herbs, naturally cleansing ways of growing crops. So a lot of one of the big reasons why we use these is aspirin is actually from willows, so that's a pretty big thing. If you all use aspirin or any sort of ibuprofen, Advil, Tylenol, anything that has an aspirin in it, that's actually from willows, which is pretty cool. Almost half of all drugs, though, used today are originally from plants. So think about that. Half of the drugs that you will use, and you can actually look at this on the ingredients list, you'll actually see a lot of this in like over-the-counter drugs. Actually, half of them are made originally from plants. Now, because we are we're in the technology age now, we are seeing a lot of these crops being man-made. We're seeing a lot of these drugs being man-made, so we don't have to use the crops as much, but originally they came from plants. This is where we're looking at tobacco, we're looking at the coca plant, we're looking at marijuana. And then this brings up, is it illegal? Is it not illegal? There's a lot of different policy and government control on a lot of this stuff. So we grow these for their hallucinogenic effects and how they make us feel, really. And obviously short term, you can do, if you chew tobacco or if you smoke, it's going to ease that craving for a little bit, but eventually you're going to want more if you have become addicted to that. So some people do use this medicinally, though, as well, which is something that's pretty neat in this day and age. If you're able to use different crops like that to ease like the effects of a disease or something along the lines of maybe cancer, that's actually a science that we've actually came up with in the United States, which is pretty neat. That will help with those side effects of maybe chemo or radiation or something like that. So, medical marijuana is a big topic that we'll talk about in class this week, and we'll look at everybody's opinion, and remember that everybody's opinion is just as important as yours is, and we're going to shake hands and agree to disagree. If we disagree with each other, that's okay, but one of the most important things when you look at these psychoactive drugs is if it's being used in a correct way to help people, is that good? So that's what we'll talk about. And remember, some of these can be used medicinally. Okay, so that's what a psychoactive crop would be. Next, let's look at toxic plants. So anything that is considered a toxic plant, we consider to be poisonous or harmful or could actually cause death. So to your right there on your screen is a castor bean plant. Those can be very detrimental to both humans and livestock. Another really common toxic plant that we see is white snake root, and we're going to be able to look at a lot of these in class. So just know that there are a lot of toxic plants out there, and that will, could be detrimental to both humans and livestock. Okay, so naming plants. How do we name plants? Like when we started this chapter, I talked to you a little bit about binomial nomenclature, and that means genus and species. So one of my favorite plants is the soybean. And when we look at the binomial nomenclature, the scientific name of a soybean it's glycine max L. Okay, so what does that mean? That means that the binomial, the genus is glycine, the nomenclature is max. Okay, so you see how that's different? There's two different words there. Binomial nomenclature, genus and species. So how do we figure out how to organize all of this? First of all, we look at the classes. Is it a monocot? Is it a dicot? Does it have one cotyledon? Does it have two cotyledons? And then we look at the family. Is it in the grass family? Is it in the legume family? Is it Poaceus? Is it a Fabaceous? What class is it, or what family is it within those classes? Crops. Okay, so we're gonna look at corn versus soybeans. Okay, obviously the kingdom gonna be both the same. Okay, division's gonna be both the same. Classes where we get a little different. Order obviously gonna be different. Family, this is where we're looking at right before binomial nomenclature. Okay, Poaceus and Fabaceous, and then the genus and the species. Corn is gonna be Zea. Okay, and then the species will be maize. So when you hear about corn, sometimes you'll hear Zea mays. Again, and with the soybean is glycine max. Okay, so that is the end of chapter 4. I will see you in class, and please have everything ready because we have a lot planned for this week, and so we will be hitting the ground running. Please write down any questions that you have pertaining to this chapter, and we will have about 10 minutes, probably not any more than 12 to 15 minutes to answer those questions, and we will talk to you then. Bye.